This time, I read every single book that Namjoon, aka RM from BTS, has recommended. Number 1, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. This was probably a long time before I started reading it because I'm not a big sci-fi fan. The story revolves around a hypothetical situation where a man escapes planet Earth after the world ends and then goes on an adventure in space because planet Earth has been destroyed. He is now a nomad. He is a hitchhiker, and this book is as unpredictable and ridiculous as it gets. Douglas Adams' book embraces the idea that life is a whole lot more enjoyable when it doesn't always make sense, and life is a lot more enjoyable when it does not. It is a great pleasure to read Douglas Adams' book. For example, he says space is big. It's so vast, huge, mind-bogglingly big that you'll never believe it. I mean, you might think it's long to get to the chemists, but that's just peanuts compared to space. Namjoon, thanks for the recommendation. I'm having a great time. Number 2, The Stranger by Albert Camus. An absurd novella like The Stranger can be defined as a short novel or a long short story. Now, RM said during a live stream that the opening line made a huge impression on him when talking about this book. Possibly yesterday or today, Mother died, but I can't be sure, and it's one of the best opening lines in any book. Tell me you wouldn't read on after reading it. I find it fascinating because when we hear about someone grieving their parents, it completely disarms us. But he is just unbothered, unfazed. I find it fascinating because he doesn't seem to care what we feel. As a result, he ends up getting caught up in a murder investigation because he shoots someone on the beach and we don't know why. It's all just bizarre. I mean, it's just bizarre. In essence, the book explores the nakedness of man while facing the absurd. Okay, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it was something different and interesting. Number 3, Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Although this is an absolute classic, I have already read it. I read it back in November. I still read it, but I don't intend to discuss it this week. I think this is, quite frankly, the weirdest book I have ever read. The plot revolves around a man who wakes up one morning to go to work, but looks at himself and says, "Oh hell, I'm a big bug." It sounds funny. Honestly, that's what this book is actually about. He's just as confused as we are. So his new life as a big bug is all about him trying to figure it out. The weird and absurd nature of this book makes it one of those books on every top 100 list of books to read before you die. Because it goes through every single detail of the new life of this man, reading it is very painful. He's still working out, though, and he seems dumbfounded by it all. Therefore, you're the same. Number 4, 1984 by George Orwell. Because I ended up doing literature as a level and then a degree because of this book, I always get excited whenever I hear about it. In this video, Namjoon talks about this book with the coolest pink hair I've ever seen. There is a huge censorship and mass surveillance system in this dystopian totalitarian regime. It seems like a kind of film about being constantly watched and having every word we say scrutinized. In the case of a famous musician who is known all over the world, I can see why that concept might be quite appealing to them. I would always recommend 1984 as one book you should read in your life because it has had a huge impact on modern society. As you can see, my copy is battered a little bit. Big Brother, Room 101, and Thorpe Police are all terms that come from this book. Because I've read it so many times, I've destroyed it a little bit. Number 5, Nature by Emerson. My issue with this is that many of the ideas presented are ones we're quite familiar with now, like they're quite common ideas. This is the first one I haven't enjoyed. Although Emerson wrote these, they probably were quite groundbreaking and thought-provoking at the time. For example, the idea that children are associated with the purity of nature, like that's something that's common knowledge nowadays. There are many lovely quotes in this book. For example, Emerson says, "Adopt a piece of nature." This is a manifesto of transcendentalism, and transcendentalism suggests that reality can be understood through studying nature. There's a secret to her patience, and that's lovely, but you don't have to read the whole thing. It's not a book that you'll want to read.